And one. Well, hey, Dave Melinda here, Positive Polarity Podcast. Hope things are going awesome for you. I got a really great question for you this week. And I'm wondering if a gym membership for your mind would be of any interest to you. And I was like, man, that sounds really cool. So I got to figure out who that was that shared that. So I'm honored to be hanging out with Brooke Bishop. How are you today, sir?
Doing awesome, Dave. Super excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for jumping on. You're the co-founder at Empire Partners. So fill us in on what Empire Partners is these days.
Yeah, so the skinny version of it. I've been in the personal development world for, scary to say this, 24 years. And
Started when you were six, right?
seriously, but no, it actually was really interesting because I was looking back when you launched Positive Polarity, or the journey that you went on. Our
Yeah,
timelines are actually somewhat parallel because in 2008, 2006 to 2010 was when I had to make some massive pivots as well.
sure.
And I was working with one of the largest coaching companies in the world at that point, a gentleman named Brian Buffini. He's big in the real estate space of training.
Okay.
And we had about 350 coaches on staff. So I left there and I got recruited by a gentleman named Tony Robbins. So in the mix of all that chaos and when the world was turning, we had to pivot. And at the time I didn't realize it, but we were about 3 months away from shutting the doors.
Oh,
And it was actually our coaching department that really turned around the company.
sure. Sure.
So yeah, and that was basically at that point in time, I was doing sales on the front end,
Okay.
and we had to shift. We didn't have any ad spend. It was literally, hey, we can't go buy any more leads. Like we have to figure something out. So
Can't buy our leads. We got to find them ourselves. Hey,
it
yeah,
very much so. Yeah.
that's tough. That's tough. Well, thanks again for jumping on. I'm honored to be hanging out with you today. And I love that question. So, I want to jump into that gym membership for your mind and these questions that I found. I really want to pose this to the audience right away because it has to do with the people that are around you. And this to me was so powerful, and I'm actually working on this in my life because I noticed that there are people that like really drag you down. And if you don't have somebody to kind of combat that, it really can mess with your journey. So your questions really were awesome. It said, do people around you help you to a higher standard? Do they lift you up? Do they believe in you? Do they provide honest feedback? And do they see your potential? And so I really want to unpack that today with you, Brooke, because I think this is we're well intentioned and we want to help people, but maybe we miss this. So I really want you to help us with that. So when you wrote that and when you were thinking about that, was there something in your life personally that kind of really related, or where did this first come from for you?
Heck to the yes. Yeah. So well, I'll say this, since the Positive Polarity podcast. Let's keep the alliteration going.
Sure.
Proximity is power. And so, are you familiar with the tuning fork
I am.
study that they did? Right.
Yep.
So for anybody who hasn't or isn't familiar with it, so if you take a multitude of tuning forks, you put them in a room, they can be all set to different frequencies. You walk in with another tuning fork, you hit it, everything else in that room, all those other tuning forks are going to resonate to the same frequency.
Wow,
And
that
so,
I didn't know. That's crazy.
the same thing is true for us as human beings, because we are not to get super woo woo, but we're light beings. Like if you really break down our structure from a scientific level, we're a bunch of atoms that are moving around rapidly, and we're set to a frequency. So when you have a peer group, whoever is the dominant person in that peer group, or whoever you're surrounding yourself with, that's going to set the harmonics. It's literally going to set the frequency for where your system vibrates at. So yeah, there's a lot of science that we could uncover within that, but
Sure.
it's really the core ethos of it is great. If you're not where you want to be, you elevate your peer group. It's going to hold you to a new level, and it's going to force you scientifically as well as mentally and physically to play different.
And when you talk about, peer group, here, Brooke, you're talking about potentially just the people you hang around with, all the way up to an actual peer group of people that you subscribe to, so to speak. I'm assuming it's a combination of both of those. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I would say peer group can be, depends on who we're talking to, right? So if somebody who's in high school, they're like, oh, my peers are my friends. Okay, if you're
Yeah,
an adult, peer group could be you and your family who lives in your house. Um, Jim Rohn actually said it, I think, best. And he says, we're the sum total of the 5 people we spend the most time with.
yeah,
So that kind of opens Pandora's box of, okay, well, who do we communicate the most with? We're
sure.
usually around a lot of people that have the similar beliefs and a similar
Yeah,
perspective, whether it's financially, physically, all the above. So that's
sure.
really where I look at peer group is that core group.
Around you. Wow. So again, for the listener, just, take a second and ponder that piece. You're the sum of the 5 people that you hang out with the most. And so if they're whatever, money focused or people focused or accomplished focused or complainers, I mean, you could really, that list is endless of what they potentially could be, I'm assuming, correct?
Well, absolutely. I mean, if this is the smell test, right? If you take the 5 people you're closest to, and if you took each person's average earnings, whether it's monthly or annually, and so you added everybody's up and you divided it by 5, how close is it to your personal income? If it's in the same ballpark, that's one of the smell tests. If you look at people physically and their physical health, take everyone's personal health, add it up, divide it by 5. Is that where you're sitting? So yeah. To that end, you can test that bad boy.
Wow, that's amazing. So really think about that. Do your people around you, do they lift you up? Are they adding value to your day, or are they trying to tear you down? And I think whether again, boy, family's tough, right? Because you kind of have to, you're stuck with family. So please don't, divorce your wife or leave your kids just because of this. We're talking about a whole different situation here. But like believing in you. So, I mean, just those words of somebody saying that. Did you have that, Brooke, in your journey early on? People kind of saying, "Wow, Brooke, I really believe in you, and I think you got it. You got what it takes." And did you have that for yourself growing up?
It's interesting in some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. So my childhood, and I won't go into all the gory details because we all, I'm sure, had magical childhoods we could share. Um, but the bipolarity, so this is actually interesting. The bipolarity of my childhood was not a positive polarity. My dad was actually a pastor. And so
Okay.
when my parents split, he remarried a woman with 6 kids. So I went from being an only child to the middle of 7 in a pastor's household.
Wow.
My mom remarried a nudist atheist, and I was an only child. So I had completely opposite upbringing. So in
No
terms of,
kidding.
and there really wasn't this dynamic of like, you can be what you want to be. It was honestly, it was chaos. Now,
Yeah.
what I was really fortunate to have was my uncle. So my uncle is actually the one that turned me on to personal development, but it
Okay.
was through what I refer to as osmosis. So we shared a room together. I was on the top bunk. He was on the bottom bunk, and he was training to become a Navy SEAL. And so he was
Mm,
listening to Jim Rohn and Bob Proctor and Tony Robbins. And,
okay.
he was listening to all
Sure.
these just incredible people. And because we
Yeah.
shared a room together, I got to hear it just by being within proximity. Right. And so he really championed me to show up differently to life and showed me that, we can set out to create the world that we want to create. And he saw greatness in me. He was a coach, right? He saw
Sure.
the highest version of me where I didn't see it yet. So yeah, so I was very, very blessed to have a mentor in that aspect. And he's a freak of a human being in his regard. So yeah,
Oh, that's
very
so
grateful to
cool.
him.
Well, I'm an only child too, so I don't see at the only child meetings, but it's good to know there's another one out there. I think what you said though is interesting, Brooke, because I feel like people don't want it's scary to think I'm in control of myself. It's a lot easier to kind of blame the government or blame politics or blame the competitor if you're in business. I mean, it's pretty easy, right, to blame that. Do you find it hard for people at the onset to kind of accept that responsibility that, wow, I really do have control here?
Yeah, and I think that the layer underneath that is when we take responsibility, we have to do something with that. So I think that the
Yeah,
bigger challenge is The moment we go, oh, I actually have control of my life, I have control of my decisions, I have control of my circumstances. The second we make that switch flip, it's like, oh crap, now what do I do with that?
Right.
I
Sure.
think that's the bigger challenge with it.
Yeah, that's like I don't know. I think about these and I think that my parents were not entrepreneurs when I was growing up. They were more probably, hey, you can I don't even know. I look back, I don't know if I'm supposed to remember this or not, but I don't remember them saying you can do it. Whatever you set your mind to, you can do. And even in my early career, you just kind of put your head down and start working. And so, I mean, is this for somebody that's listening, this might be new for them, where they're, thinking about their group around them. I mean, this is pretty darn important from what I read and researched on your end. This is real, you're passionate about this, it looked like.
Well, it really comes down to this. What quality of life do you want? So the quality of our life is going to be determined by our decisions. And if our decisions are heavily determined by where we're spending our time, it literally comes back to, you want the quality of your life to shift. Great. Peer group's a
Yeah.
really good starting point.
Wow. And you're doing peer groups as part of Empire then, is that correct?
We do. So we actually have a mastermind, if we're kind of
Okay.
going technical languaging around it, but it really is more of a group of humans. Their sole purpose, their mission, they're coaches. They're people who've already made a commitment to playing life at a higher level. And so
Sure.
it's all about elevating and pushing the envelope of where we could play, or how well or how big we can actually start to see things.
Wow. And again, I sense the listener right now resisting purely because there are a lot of people that I've always heard there's three types of people, right? There's people that watch things happen, there's people that make things happen, and then there's people that don't know what's happening. And so it's interesting because I feel like on one hand, in entrepreneurship, we wanted to take over. But then somewhere along the line there, it feels, Brooke, like we just kind of put our hands up and we think it's on autopilot. And that's got to be a big fundamental mind shift for somebody, like I said before, that really realizes I am in charge of this thing. Like you just said, those decisions that you make, the beliefs that you have, it seems like a lot of work, I guess. Um, what's your response to somebody that's like, I don't, dude, I don't have time for this. I mean, how do you respond to that listener right now that's thinking that?
The time hook you just dropped in there, that's a little bit of the linchpin. And I think that's where a lot of us get hung up, honestly, is the time piece of it.
Okay.
And a good friend of mine, his name's Chad Cooper. So he's freak in his own way. He's Nobel laureate. He's the list goes on. But he wrote a book called "Time's Not the Problem, You Are." So
Mm,
pretty direct. But why I bring him up is he talks about time. Time is the great equalizer. So we all have 168 hours in a week. It's the only thing that unites all of us behind
yeah,
our skin, our DNA, our genders, like all those different pieces. Time is the great equalizer. So there's this dynamic of, what quality of life do we desire? Do we want to be in the driver's seat, or do we want to be in the passenger seat? I mean, it really comes down to that. I would
wow,
like to think, dare I say this, but if somebody's an entrepreneur, somebody's in business for themselves, or even if somebody's in leadership,
yeah.
that would attract more people that want to be drivers versus passengers. But the time piece it's a mission critical component. So it really comes down to, who do you see yourself as,
Yeah.
right? So your identity, what are you doing with your time? And then the biggest one is, what are the expectations or standards that you've put on yourself? You
Wow.
combine those three together, that is literally going to play out the quality of life that you have.
So I'm gonna this is a weird question, but it just popped into my head because I think about people that wear masks or that are posers. They're not really authentic. That's gotta really those masks and all that shatters if you really jump into some kind of peer group, I'm assuming, correct?
It can. It depends. I think it really depends on the space that people hold for you, right? Like, imposter syndrome it's real. And I think it's
Yeah.
actually one of the biggest, if we look at the yin and yang of the world of personal development,
Yeah.
there's so many people that have talked about the fake it till you make it dynamic.
Right.
And that we can't be that way anymore. I mean, what the world needs, what people are craving is authenticity. And so having a peer group or having a space where you can go and be like, hey, I'm freaked out, or I'm scared, or I'm struggling, or I'm like, to be able to be vulnerable is almost
Yeah.
a superpower now.
Yeah. Wow. And I don't know about you, but man, that's, I think, one of the best breakthroughs on coaching when I'm coaching somebody and they literally are like, Dave, I don't know what to do next. That's it. On one hand, it's so powerful to say because now they have to own it, right? In the past, it was just in their mind. Now they owned it. Now someone else knows about it. Is that kind of, I mean, did you have that spot? I mean, do you struggle with that where it's like, oh my gosh, what do I do next? Or do things just kind of naturally progress for you?
I would say so. I think culturally we've shamed people for not knowing. Like,
Yeah.
right? Oh, you don't know the answers. Oh, you're getting a lower grade. Oh, you didn't know how to pass your SATs at the highest score, so you don't get to go to the school you want to. And even employers, oh, you don't know you're my employee. Like, how dare you? Like, you're out.
Yeah.
So I think we have this conditioning of shaming for not knowing. So there was a long time where I literally I wanted to be perceived or seen as the smartest person in the room, and if I wasn't that, like I had failed.
Sure.
And it was actually Tony Robbins who actually had a little intervention with me about that. It was fun. But there's this dynamic of not knowing is actually magical, because that, and being able to admit that I don't know, that precedes a breakthrough, right? Because on the other side of that is asking a new question, or seeking out new answers, or finding somebody who can help you crack the code. So
Yeah.
there's magic in that if we can embrace not knowing, versus all of us walking around as I'm the expert, I know all the answers. We don't know shit. We just
Yeah.
don't.
Right.
So
Wow. And that's really, and to me, that's like pride in an ego thing, right? Where you want to know, like you just said, you want it to be the smartest person in the room. I know, and so it was March, no, it was May of 2020 when everything shut down. And I was like, I still want to talk to people. So I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to have a weekly call with new people that I don't know on Zoom, just like this. And I'm like, you know what? As long as I'm doing that, I might as well hit the record button just in case something
awesome.
really revelatory gets out of this, right? And I'm like, well, you know what? As long as I'm pushing the button, maybe somebody else wants to hear this. So that's how the podcast started. And I'll never forget, Brooke, my one of my good friends was my first guest, and it was Wayne Breitbarth, who was a LinkedIn expert. And so I thought for the first like 10 seconds of my podcast that I was the one that was going to be doing the teaching. And after like 10 seconds, I'm like, what are you doing? Just ask the questions and learn. And for the next 200 episodes now, I just learn. And it's like such a safe place to be where I'm like, dude, I know the answer to that question. Um, and I'm assuming, were you ever in a spot like you just said, where you wanted to be the smartest person? How did you transition away from that? I'm just curious.
I had to shift my questioning. So there's another coach friend of mine. His name's Shashin Shah. He gave me something that was so freaking powerful. He said, human beings are in two states. We're either in a state of criticism or we're in a state of curiosity.
Mm,
And you can't be in both at the same time. And so at the time, I was being hypercritical of myself, which he highlighted for me is that I'm now being critical of others, because you can't, if you're in that state, you're projecting that same, if you're projecting on yourself, you're going to project it on everyone else around you. And he
sure.
goes, look, how much more powerful would it be if you got curious with yourself and if you got curious with everyone else? And it was like a light bulb. It was something so subtle and so simple.
Yeah.
But I'm
Wow.
like, the magic isn't being curious. That's where the power lives.
That's super cool. When we come back, I want to learn more about Tony Robbins because everybody knows that name. And so I know it's had an impact on your life. So when we come back, I want to kind of unpack that.
Cool.
Awesome. Welcome back. We're with Brooke Bishop, the co-founder at Empire Partners. And again, thank you so much for carving out some time. So, in addition to being a second degree black belt, which is kind of a cool thing. I mean, it's so intimidating to us or to me, who has no clue what that means, other than I'm sure you could kick my ass just by looking at me the right way.
Quite the opposite.
think, okay, just laying it out there. But so you had spent some time with Tony Robbins on his team. And so what was that like for you? I mean, that must have been like drinking out of a fire hose, or what was that like for you?
Super intense, and one of the most magical growth experiences ever, because he's playing at such a high level. To stay in the conversation, your game has to go up, right? Because you're either playing or you're getting pushed off the team. So
Sure.
uh, what I call it, to survive, it's almost like I did my time, right? But to survive in
Yeah.
that space for 15 years and to work alongside him and with him and be in those conversations was, honestly, it was magical, because
Wow.
he sees the world through such different lenses. He literally sees it through, it is infinite possibilities. Whatever we want to do, however we want to create things, it's available to us. So there's not a
Sure.
lot of limiters, whereas most people come in with those limiting beliefs.
So those limiting beliefs that we have about ourselves, are those, I mean, they're probably pretty deep into us. This take a while for us to really, work through that. In today's, microwave world, we want a 30-second solution to this, Brooke, and then we'll be happy to, jump back into what we were doing. It's got to take some time, whether you're talking about the imposter syndrome, the limiting beliefs. I mean, these are some things that take time for us, I'm assuming, correct?
They can. So you opened a can there.
That's the
uh,
plan.
so I would say it this way: it takes this much time, right? So what it really comes down to is a decision. And so this is
Yeah.
something I learned from Tony, right? It's like it took me 10 years to have my breakthrough. Well, no, you had 10 years of playing the same story over and over and over again. And it took an instant to make a decision to no longer live that way. What is a challenge, and it's actually interesting because my grandfather, who he was a multi-mega millionaire many times over, and he lost all of it many times over, and he died broke.
Oh my gosh.
But the thing that was fascinating, he was actually best friends with Walt Disney. So you can kind of imagine like the savant, crazy
Yeah.
dialogues that went through their heads. But the thing that always stood out with me with him was he said that the people who are the most successful are the best decision makers. The people who can make decisions the quickest, they don't always make the right decision, but they
Yeah.
decide. And so with Tony, that's really, in terms of going back to the question of limiting beliefs, or how do
Yeah.
we navigate through that? There's traumas, there's all these different things that contribute to it, but it really can come down to that split decision of never again, no more, I'm burning the boats.
Hmm. Wow, that's crazy. So if for somebody that is listening that maybe imposter syndrome or these limiting beliefs, they're struggling with those, and maybe this is the first, maybe it's been a blind spot up until now, and it's getting some light shed on that. Where would somebody go in that case? I mean, is that something that you guys at Empire Partners work on with people, or for somebody that would be listening and they were like, man, I need to at least flush this out in my own mind, where would you send them, or what would their next step be in that case?
So honestly, the beauty of this the power of what we do, both you and myself, right? So if they're wanting to have a breakthrough in some particular area of their life, that's the power of coaching. So for people who are looking at, hey, I'm struggling because my peer group's not elevating, it's got me, I'm in this zone and I can't completely shatter that peer group in this moment. Cool. That's the power of coaching. Find a coach, somebody who's going to be honest with you, who's not going to hold back, who's not going to sugarcoat it, somebody who's going to call it tight, who's going to
Oh,
give you the truth and hold up that mirror in a loving way, in a compassionate way, not for the position
yep,
of judging you, but for the position of elevating you to a higher calling.
sure.
Get yourself a coach. If you're looking to elevate in business, you're an entrepreneur. If you've got a lot of yes men or yes women, as most business owners tend to hire those people, they hire people that they like because they want to spend time
Yeah.
with them. Good reason. Get your ass a business coach who's going to call it tight and elevate the game.
Wow, that's great, great advice. I mean, imagine where Tiger Woods would be or wouldn't be today without any of his coaches.
Yeah,
Swing
he'd be
coach,
out.
nutrition coach. Yeah, he would never, no, we wouldn't probably even know who he is. And I've watched his kid a little bit, Tiger said his kid's actually feels is probably better than him at his age. So who knows where that's going to be. Why are we why are we so darn resistant to what you just said? I mean, why is that so hard for somebody to be, that's it, I'm gonna pick up the phone or I'm gonna commit to that, why is that so hard for people, do you think, Nick?
So the way I perceive it is that the biggest fear that we walk around every day, and this is everybody, and it's a
Yeah,
survival mechanism, but the biggest fear we have is the fear of being judged, the fear of not being good enough. And so
gotcha.
there's this element of being found out, like, oh, what if they find out about this dark past part of my past? Or what if they find out I don't have as much money as I'm leading everybody to believe? Or what if they find out I live in this neighborhood, or I drive that car, or if I've got 10 extra pounds or 100 extra pounds in my body? We
Yeah,
walk around with these fears, and that prevents us from wanting to have real, honest conversations. Because again, we've been conditioned to hide that stuff. And I mean, you look at social media. Do we put our fat picture up there? No, we put our best picture that we can because we want people to see the best version of ourselves in that one blink of an eye, that moment,
right? Yeah,
right? It really comes down to the fear of being judged, the fear of not being good enough, the fear of not succeeding, or having somebody else call us on the reality or the truth of what's going on. We'll
yeah.
stay in a space of what we perceive as being safe, and we'll stay stuck versus having those real authentic conversations and really stepping into our true power and our true greatness.
Sure. Oh, we talk about it all the time. Whenever I'm in a training, I put up that picture of the comfort zone, the fear zone, the growth zone, and the learning zone. And it's so funny because most people are comfortable in the comfort zone. They're okay with that, right? And I'm okay with it too. The reality is if you're trying to get to the growth zone or the growth zone or the learning zone, there's that fear zone that's in between there. And boy, we come up with excuses, we come up with reasons. And like you said, boy, the fear of just being found out is so incredibly, that's paralyzing for people, you
Well, we
know?
we we clutch to our stories. I mean, our story about ourselves, our identity, our childhood, or what happened to
Yeah,
us, or who wronged us. We grip onto that thing so freaking tight because it gives us certainty, and it becomes an identity. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because we live looking in the rearview mirror versus taking our eyes down and looking at where we really want to go.
yeah. Well, but look at, I mean, the world now, you got to get an award at the Emmys. You got to have a number one this. I mean, there's all of that going on. So, I mean, we kind of bring it on ourselves. Um, you
Absolutely.
know, and it's funny because, I always tell people when they ask me if I could speak to their group, I'm like, I got to tell you, I have all my limbs. I didn't meet anybody famous. I mean, I don't have this, like, I didn't climb Mount Kilimanjaro or Everest, or, I didn't do anything like that. It's just that for me, 30, 40 years of doing this, like you said, so I just want to again reiterate for somebody listening, if you're stuck in that fear spot, in that fear zone, there are ways to get out. And that's why, Brooke's here to be able to help with that. So, tell us about Core Four. I'm interested to understand what that is and how that helps.
So the core four, shows up in a few different areas. So the core four with regards to business is we usually want to look at the core four areas of a person's business and
Okay.
make sure that they've got that dialed in so that they can grow and scale their business. And so the core four, what it really breaks down to at a simple high level is number one is your marketing. Number two is your sales.
Okay.
Number three is your methods of fulfillment, whatever that looks like.
Sure.
And then the fourth piece that weaves into that is the psychology of the business owner.
Hmm. What is that? That was the one that I was trying to wrap my brain around. Obviously, for people listening, they're all like, "Yeah, totally get marketing. Yeah, totally get sales, method of fulfillment." I probably never heard it that way, but I get what you're saying. The psychology piece really kind of threw me for a loop. So, and can you fill us? How does that tie in to the marketing, the sales, the method? How does that tie into the business?
The business will only grow to the psychology, to the level of the psychology of the owner. So if you think of it this way, let's just play with magic numbers here. Let's say a company is doing $100,000 a year. So say it's
Okay.
small business, 100
Yep.
k per year. If the business owner is thinking of how do we get to 150,000 a year? How do we get to 150,000 a year? They're not going to come up with strategies of how do we get to a million because they're only asking questions and their beliefs and their focus is only on that which their paradigm is allowing them to go after.
Okay.
So if a business owner is sitting there thinking, oh, I've got to do everything, no one else can do this job, I've got to do all of it. Well, how in the hell are they going to hire the right people? And will they ever offload and actually give people the keys to drive on their own? So the
Sure.
business owner is going to set the cadence and the expectation, and the people that work for them are going to follow in suit because that's the boss. They set, so kind of going back to our tuning fork, there's actually an interesting little closing of the loop that came up here. But the business owner is that tuning fork that walks in the room. They're the ones setting the frequency for everybody else that's there.
So really, it comes back to what we talked about the people around you. If you're on that team and that leader is limiting their thoughts, then they, by default, I want to say, they almost limit your thoughts. Is that kind of how that works?
Absolutely. And they may limit your thoughts. Actually, let's go this route. They may not limit your thoughts, but they'll limit your capacities. So, and I'm sure you've had this experience before too, where you work with somebody where at some point you go, my vision for this company is bigger than the boss's vision. And then you start to butt heads because you're like, we could go here, we could do this. And they're comfortable, or their psychology has blinders and it's keeping them stuck where they're at. So yeah, it can show up in a number of different ways.
Oh my gosh, that is just happening right now with somebody that I'm working with. And yeah, I mean, but I gotta say, and I don't know if you've had that experience, because I've had it. I started a business in 1991 and we had $0 coming in. I mean, literally $0. And then when I sold it in 2012, we had 10 million in annual sales.
That's awesome.
So, I mean, I started at 0, and like $100 a month was like a big deal, right? Because it's such a big scale from nothing. So I almost feel like my question is, how do I not? I want to be realistic in my vision up front. I mean, I didn't have vision of 10 million in annual sales. Now, maybe that's where the problem came in. But is everybody that starts at 0, are they supposed to be, is there a sweet spot, or is it just really where you personally want to take your own business?
It's somewhat of a loaded question. And here's what I mean by that. So one is, everybody's going to have a different vision of where they want to go. They're going to have a different vision of how they get there. They're going to have a different vision of what it's going to even look and feel like when they get to the top of their Everest. So what I usually have people do is go, first off, what is the mountain that you want to summit? And are you setting up the story in your mind that it's going to be as hard as summiting Mount Everest, or is it going to be as hard as summiting, a sand dune, right? Because those have two very different experiences. Yeah. Secondarily, once you get really clear of what the destination is, burn the frickin' boats. And so what I mean by that, don't make compromises on your outcome. You can make compromises on the journey. You can make compromises on the timeline. You can compromise on who your Sherpa is going to be and how you're going to get to the summit. Don't compromise on the frickin' summit, right? And so that's what happens for a lot of people, especially business owners, is they're constantly pivoting whatever their outcome is to try and make it so that their business feels better for wherever the heck they're at. So first and foremost, get really clear of what the destination is and don't compromise. Secondarily, focus on base camp. So you set the target, the outcome, get to base camp, acclimate, get yourself there, make sure you're surviving. Great. Then go to the next stage, then go to the next stage, then go to the next stage.
Wow, that's great. I had somebody on the show that actually did do Everest, and it took 60 some days to get up there. It was Eric Plantenberg. And I'm like, Eric, I mean, tell me how this works. And he said you'd go up, like you said, to base camp, and then you'd go up a little further, and then you'd have to come back down to go get, I mean, there was more going down this thing than there was going up. And I'm like, what the heck fun was that? I mean, especially if you've gone this the third or fourth time. I mean, for me, a novice, I just felt like every day would be a new height, right? So that's really awesome that you have that thought process there. So marketing and sales, methodology, and then the psychology of the owner. I never would have thought of that. That is so powerful. Is that like a revelation for others, or is this just a party of one for me? Because I never would have thought of that.
For me, it's funny because now for me, I'm like, what? Everyone doesn't think that way. It was a cornerstone for how Tony taught, honestly. So in the world of working with Tony Robbins, it really came down to the psychology of leadership. And so where he, as a really solid leader, as a business owner, he
Yeah,
championed us on our psychology more than he did on our skill set. He's like, look, we can go hire people for the skill set. He goes, I need leaders who can think beyond where we're at. I need people who can hold a vision. I need people who can have the certainty that we'll find a
sure.
way.
How did he know? I mean, how did that? I love that thought because like, we're in the same spot here in life in general. We can hire anybody can hire words per minute or whatever it is nowadays, right? For this skill. That dates me right there. But it used to be you'd have to have X number of words per minute, you'd have to know this, you'd have to know all this. There was like prerequisites. Now it was like we can train on that, but that whole attitude or that whole mindset that you're talking about, how did you guys like how did you find that, or how did you know if somebody had that? That's got to be a talent right there.
So for us, it was an expectation, right? Because the way the thought process behind it was the way that people show up to most things is how they're going to show up to everything. So even getting hired,
Okay.
for like going through a gauntlet just
Yeah.
to even have a seat at the table to even be interviewed, and then the interview was crazy, and then the first month of being there was like, where am like my first day on the job? Actually, this is one crazy story. So my first day working for Tony Robbins, in my mind, I'm like, I'm going to work for the guy that's been like my mentor, this is the best thing that could ever happen to me.
Sure,
And
sure.
I showed up to the office, in my cubicle space. I'm like, I'm looked as soon as the HR walked me up, I'm looking around, I'm going, is this for real? Like the cubicle walls were falling in on the desk space. I had the oldest computer you can imagine. It had like a giant floppy drive. The monitor, the perimeter of the monitor was all blurred out because it was so old. So I couldn't even
Oh
make out
no.
like the outside 3 inches.
Sure.
There was no chair, and somebody rather large had sat on the computer desk and it was buckled in. And I'm like, what the? So my
Uh,
first day, my lunch, I went to Home Depot and I bought all the parts to fix all of it. And I went to HR and I said, hey, my computer desk is giving me a migraine. I've only been here for like 2 hours. They're like,
uh,
that's what we got. I'm like, okay. So I went online and I ordered, when Dell was still really, the mega
sure.
computer company.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
ordered my own pimped out Dell computer and reset up my whole office space. And
Wow.
so there was this dynamic of, when I was there, I'm like, I have to be successful. There's no other option. Like, no matter what, like it's on me. Like my success is going to be my own. I can't
Yeah.
put it on them to make me successful. Otherwise they wouldn't need me. And so that mindset really was kind of the domino that really carried that through. But that's how you had to play. Right.
Did they
So
set that up for you on purpose or so that you would overcome that?
I don't know. It was brutal. My way of getting back at them, this was the fun part, because they're like, nope, we don't have another computer. So I told everybody else that was on the floor, I go, because they came by and they're like, where the hell did you get this computer? I'm like, oh yeah, if you just go down to HR, ask them for a new computer. They've got a bunch of them down there. Just go hit them up. So for months, they were all basically crying to HR.
Oh, new guy on the block doing that.
Yep. So I had to razz
That
them.
doesn't end well.
No.
Well, hey, it made it 15 years. That's awesome. Wow. Hey, I'm gonna land the plane today. But I want to ask you a question. Tip of the day for somebody listening. Maybe it's something that we covered, maybe it's something that's just burning in your heart right now, but somebody needs a word from you, and I'd love for you to share that with them.
Yeah. For leaving people with one last piece, I would say this: you're enough. You're enough. You're good enough. You have enough energy within you to literally transform the planet, to transform your life, to transform your family. If you've got an extra pound on your body that you're willing to donate, in terms of, if you went to the gym and you had a personal trainer that said, how much weight do you want to lose? If you've got more than 1 pound, you have enough energy that's sitting dormant in your system to take and create the life that you truly desire. So from that standpoint, know that you're enough. And here's the biggest piece: decide. Decide that there's something greater. Decide that the way you've been doing it, there's another way. There's another strategy. There's somebody out there that has the skill set, or that has a gift or their own magic to help you take your world to the next level.
Wow. If you are listening and you choose not to do that, I totally get it. That we respect that piece. We bring each week these types of ideas. This is fantastic. And so I always encourage people, rather than jump into your next podcast or rather than close this down, and jump into your next activity, just sit with what just happened. I mean, this last 40 minutes has been it could be revolutionary for you as an individual. And so I just want you to at least acknowledge that there's some really good stuff here. And if people are stuck or they want to learn more about you, Brooke, what's the best way for people to connect with you?
Yeah, empirepartners.io. So empireparts.io. We've got tons of amazing tools that are there. If somebody's in business, if they are a coach, a consultant, or an expert themselves, they want to create their program, we have tons of free tools. If people are needing supports and growing their business, whether it's the marketing side, the sales side, or if it's the psychology of the leader and they want to elevate and play higher level, yeah, check out the website. There's a ton of different ways we can help support no matter where somebody's at.
And it's empirepartners.io.
Yep.
Perfect. That is
You
so
say it cooler
cool.
with your
With that Midwest accent,
yeah,
that's
I
just
love it.
we have no clue what we just got running water and electricity up here lately, so we're happy. So awesome. Well, thank you so much for hanging out. I have so many other questions. I'm gonna have to get you back because this is just really it was presented in such a strong, simple way. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for breaking it down to where there's some manageable things that we can do, whether it's join a mastermind. But again, a gym membership for your mind is where we started. And what a great idea to actually, consider that. I hope it's not like a January 1st, New Year's resolution that by the 10th, you're back to doing whatever, your Doritos and Oreos. Not that there's anything wrong with Doritos and Oreos. That sounds pretty good right about now. But thank you again, Brooke, for hanging out with us. And I can't wait to keep learning from you.
Oh man, thank you for having me here, and thank you for letting me share and getting to hopefully serve more people, and that's most importantly the people who love listening to your podcast, man.